14. And the reason why we're taking 2 weeks on this, it has 72 verses in this chapter, and there's a lot going on. And Jesus is literally just hours away from his crucifixion. And I don't believe days away, I believe hours. And as people have flocked and pilgrims made their way as pilgrims to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, Jesus was preparing for his crucifixion. So on one hand, they did not suspect anything. They were preparing for all the festivities that went along with it. And Jesus was preparing for something far, far different. Before I get into the chapter, I want to spend a little while in introducing the chapter. In order to do so, I need to go back to the Old Testament a little bit. But look with me at verse 1 of Mark 14. After 2 days was the feast of the Passover and of unleavened bread. So there's that going on, and I need to explain what that is so we can get the context of what the rest of the chapter and really the following chapter is all about. In the Old Testament, if you remember, the Israelites was sold into slavery or put into slavery into Egypt. After being in bondage for many, many years, finally they cried out to God many times. God heard their cry, saw their affliction. He raised up a man by the name of Moses, called him out of a burning bush, and said, "Go get my people. I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him, go get my people. Let my people go." And so he went, plague after plague after plague. Some of the plagues, the people of Egypt cried out to Pharaoh saying, "Hey, let's get rid of these visitors here. Let's get rid of them, and different reasons, Pharaoh kept them around. Finally, on the 10th one, God said, "Okay, this is going to be the icing on the cake. On this day, I want you to take a lamb, and I want you to kill this animal and take the blood and put it on the doorpost of the house. And that evening, a death angel would pass over you, and anyone who trusted God and God's way of deliverance would be saved, would be delivered. But all those who did not trust God and his way, there would be death that day when the angel had passed over." And so many of the Egyptians, not all, but many of the Egyptians did not believe God and his way. And so that evening there was much death in the country. They literally wanted Israel gone. They helped pack their bags and scooted them out. In fact, the bread had not even risen yet, and so they took unleavened bread with them. And they took juice and some supplies and such out, and that day marked their deliverance. Every year after that, they celebrated this festive time, calling it the Passover, commemorating the deliverance that God gave them from bondage. That always happened on the 14th day of Nisan. And the very next day, on the 15th day, was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Even today, the Passover, the celebration is celebrated with unleavened bread, juices, and bitter herbs. Of course, the bread symbolized the unleavened bread that they took with them. The juice represented the blood that was put on the doorpost. The bitter herbs or the bitterness represented the slavery. So it was all symbolic. When we have communion, we take a piece of bread and juice. Again, yes, it points back to the Passover, but for our salvation, because the body and the blood was spilt of the lamb that was slain for our salvation. Well, one thing about I said that the Passover happened on the 14th of Nisan. The 15th of Nisan was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It lasted 7 days. The first day and the last day were special convocations. They were holy convocations or Sabbath days. So not only did the Jew have a weekly Sabbath, but they also had Sabbaths during the year every time they had a holy convocation. In this case, when the Feast of Unleavened Bread came, that whole week, the first day and the last day was Sabbath days. So if you'll bear with me, Jesus, who rose again on the first day of the week, that's Sunday, which is the Jews' Saturday evening, taking away 3 days from there, Saturday evening to Friday evening, 1 day, Friday evening to Thursday evening, 2 days, Thursday evening to Wednesday evening, 3 days. So Jesus was put on the cross on Wednesday morning, actually, 9 a.m., but he had to be taken off the cross and put in the tomb before Wednesday would end, because that begins the next day. The Bible says that Jesus was killed or crucified on the day of preparation. The Jews, any time before a Sabbath day took place, the day before was the preparation, because the Sabbath day was a day where they were restricted to do things. So the day before, they had to prepare for it. And so most people think Jesus died and was crucified on Good Friday because the Sabbath is on a Saturday. But that week, when Jesus was crucified on the 14th of Nisan, Wednesday, 3 days from Sunday, the very next day is the Sabbath. It's the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's on a Thursday. The day of preparation is the day before. Jesus was crucified on the day before the Sabbath. So he's crucified on a Wednesday, and the day of preparation is on a Wednesday. And so that's how you explain all of those things. By the way, these things apply spiritually to us as well. Even though we may not hold these feasts as Christians, the Feast of Unleavened Bread was a time where they went into the house and cleaned every corner and got rid of everything that was yeast, because yeast symbolized sin. And so much like the Jews celebrate that, we too should, in our life, purge our life of sin. And I don't think it should be stifled to only 1 week of the year, but nevertheless, it's an idea that we ought to concentrate on. We could apply that. So all of this is happening in these moments before the crucifixion. And so here we are on this the Feast of Passover and Unleavened Bread, and these are the events that's going to happen. Now, in this chapter, what's going to happen, Jesus is going to go to one place, and then the next place, and the next place, and the next place, and people respond to him differently. I was in a room yesterday. It was either Monday or yesterday, I don't remember, and it was at a doctor's office, and this person was choosing out lenses, and I was the only guy in all of the office, and everybody else were women. And I noticed that when I got there, because everyone was staring at me. I'm sure it's because of my good looks, but nevertheless, it was just an eye place here in town, and I went in, and I said, do you know how long this person's going to be, so I can come back at that time? They said, well, it could be 30 minutes or 60 minutes, all depends on how long she takes. I said, well, it's a woman shopping, so who knows how long it's going to be. And I meant it as a joke. I got the most evil stares from all these women, and I was the minority. I said, I'll see you later. I got out of Dodge, but I always get a reaction no matter where I go, amen? Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But Jesus, he's going to enter a town called Bethany. There, he's going to be adored. In the upper room, he's going to be betrayed. In the garden, he's going to be forsaken. In the high priest's palace, he's going to be rejected. In Pilate's hall, he's going to be condemned. And so, if you were to take one event, okay, all right, let's do it this way. If I were to summarize most of the Old Testament, not all, but most of the Old Testament, it would revolve much of it, in my opinion, around a 70-year Babylonian period. Because there were books written during that time, before that time, and after that time. That's a lot of the historical, minor, and major prophets. It's all revolving around that period. Much like that, this chapter revolves around one place, and that's the Garden of Gethsemane. So there's events that going to happen before that, in the garden, and then after the garden. Okay? So let's tackle this tonight as much as we can get done, and then we'll finish the chapter next week. All right, so Roman numeral 1, events before the Gethsemane. You have the outline, I think, right? Okay. I felt like a bumblebee. That's why it's yellow and black colors up there. And can you guys see that fine, or does it need to be a little darker? Yes, everybody okay? Needs to be darker? It's okay? All right. All right, so letter A, the plots. The plots. There are actually two plots against Christ. First of all, number 1, by the chief priest. By the chief priest. Look with me again at chapter 14, verse number 1. After 2 days was the feast of the Passover and of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and scribes sought how they might take him by craft and put him to death. They said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people. So the very first plot was by the chief priest. The second plot is by Judas Iscariot. By the way, there's a couple of Judases in the Bible. This one, Iscariot, he's really just named after his hometown, Kerioth, and that's where he gets his name. But nevertheless, look at verse 10. And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went unto the chief priest to betray him unto them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought how he might conveniently betray him. By the chief priest and by Judas Iscariot. Okay, so those are the two plots. Again, the chief priests are involved with both, but nevertheless, they were glad that somebody was on the same page as they were. Letter B, the preparation. The preparation. In the next several verses, a woman is going to pour an ointment on Jesus, and Jesus is going to respond in a very positive way, saying, hey, leave her alone, it's okay. She has prepared my body for death. Back in those days, the body would stink, and oftentimes they would perfume the body with various oils and spices and such. So, number 1, the place. The place. It tells us where he's at. It says in verse 3, and being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. It tells us also what he was doing, although it's not part of our notes, as he sat at meat. All right, so they're having a meal together. There's the place. We see number 2, the person. Again, remember a couple of weeks ago I said as we go through this series, you have to almost read different Gospels to get the whole story. Here, Mark includes some things that the other Gospels don't, but here Mark leaves some things out as well. It doesn't even mention who this woman is. Here in this verse, it says, there came a woman having an alabaster box, that's just a type of a stone, of ointment of spikenard, very precious. Well, here it doesn't tell us who the person is, but somewhere else it does. So hold your place here in the book of Mark. Flip over to your right to the book of John. John chapter 11. John chapter 11. Remember, he's in Bethany. That matters quite a bit. John chapter 11, look at verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. And then in parentheses, it was that Mary which anointeth the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet, I want you to notice that, with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Look at chapter 12. Look at verse number 3. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now, so we know who the person is or the woman is, and that is Mary. By the way, Mary is found 3 times in the Gospels, and each time she's found at the feet of Jesus. Well, holding your place in John, we see the point number 3, the perfume. The perfume. Again, John 12, verse 3, it says, and she anointed the feet of Jesus. But back in, now hold your place in John, but back in Mark, it says that she brake the box and poured it on his head. Some people have a problem with that, saying, see, the Bible has discrepancies. No, it's just 2 perspectives. There's nothing wrong with somebody pouring it on your head and taking some of it and putting it on the feet, or as it drips downward, because gravity does flow, and then she takes her hair and wipes it off his feet. There's nothing wrong with both of these being true. Just because one mentions head, one mentions feet, it doesn't mean there's a discrepancy or an error. Okay, so that's that. There's the perfume. By the way, the spikenard was an ointment, a perfume that was imported. It was very costly. It usually came from India. And the whole jar, from what I've read in a couple of different places, was really the amount of an annual income back then for a regular laborer. So the perfume. Number 4, the protest. The protest. I'm still in the book of John. We're going to go right back to Mark after I look at this verse here. Letter A, the woman is denounced. Look at John chapter 12. Look at verse 4. Then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Now at this time, his other apostles, his other friends, co-laborers, did not even know that he would be the one betraying Christ. And so for him to say something, the other guys didn't suspect anything. Look at verse 6. This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag or the purse and bear what was put therein. So he didn't want it to go to waste because it gave him less opportunity to steal and to embezzle. All right, so let's now go back to the book of Mark. So in John it says Judas Iscariot did it, but here in the book of Mark, watch what it says. Look at verse 4. And there were some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of the ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor. And they murmured against her. And again, here's plural. They murmured. They did this. There were some that did this. There's nothing wrong with it. There's not a problem here. Judas is the one that's instigating it, and the people are going, yeah, yeah. You know how it is, among the mob mentality, usually there's just a few that cry out. We'll see that here in the next couple of chapters, how a few cry out and it gets the rest interested in anger. We've seen that in the last year in our nation's history, how a lot of riots and things can take place just because of a few instigators. But the woman is denounced. And letter B, the woman is defended. Jesus takes up this woman's defense, says, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good. But me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She has come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. And then verse 9, verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her. And so there was folks who condemned her, and yet he defended her. And so fill these notes in. Number one, concerning the poor. So he spoke the first 2 verses about the poor, and the last 2 was concerning the perfume. It was to prepare his body for the burying. All right, letter C, the Passover meal. The Passover meal. He gives, number one, the instructions. Now, keep in mind, for the Jews, the Passover was something that took place in the past, but they had an annual celebration to commemorate the past. Jesus is going to take the celebration, and much like every Passover, they would have this bread and this juice, but he would now give new meaning to it, saying, this is what this bread means, this is what the juice means from now on. And he was trying to get them to see this. Look at verse number 12. And the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto them, where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover? And he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples, and saith to them, go ye into the city, and there shall meet a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. Now let me point out a couple of things here. First of all, it was typically the woman who bore the pitchers. So for them to find a guy bearing a pitcher would be something noticeable, much like I was noticed in the doctor's office, like, what's he doing here? That type of thing. The other day I was walking through a store, didn't even realize where I was heading, and I was walking right through the women's undergarment section, and all these women would look at me like, what are you doing? And I wasn't even paying attention where I was at. I was just trying to focus on where I was going. And I look around and go, oh, what are you doing here? That type of thing. Well, it would be easy to spot out. I forgot to tell you about that, honey. I lost my train of thought. Oh, it'd be easy to see this guy carrying a pitcher. Well, again, Mark does not mention who the 2 disciples are. It says in verse 13, he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples. All right, so let's find out who they were. So hold your place here in Mark. Flip over to the book of Luke. Luke chapter 22. Look at verse 8. And he sent Peter and John, saying, go and prepare us the Passover that we may eat. So those are the 2 guys he's referring to in the book of Mark, Peter and John, that he's telling them to go. Look again with me at verse number 14. He says, and wheresoever ye shall go in, say ye to the goodman of the house, the master saith, where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. His disciples went forth and came into the city, and found as he said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. Okay, so those were the instructions that were given. Number 2, the indictment. The indictment. Letter A, the betrayal. So look with me at verse 16. The disciples have already gone up. They made ready the Passover. Now verse 17, in the evening he cometh with how many? The 12. That's very important to notice because Judas has not yet betrayed him. So there are 12 going up to the upper room. And verse 18, and as they sat and did eat. Now stop there. What is not told is what happens between verse 17 and 18. And you don't know that, and we're not going to take time to turn, but in John 13 is the whole illustration of Jesus having the 12 disciples there and washing their feet. So that whole thing, Mark doesn't even mention that at all. And so, but we can find that in other passages, but not in the book of Mark. And it's sandwiched between 17 and 18. So he washes their feet, And then verse 18, and as they sat and did eat, Jesus said, Verily I say unto you, one of you which eateth with me shall betray me. All right, so that's the betrayal, letter A. Letter B, the baffled. The baffled. All the other guys are going to go, who is it? Is it me? Is it me? And they were caught off guard. They didn't suspect Judas. They didn't suspect anybody else. And I'm certain that there are in many churches people who are fooling others. They dress up, act, talk like us, and they're a Judas Iscariot. They're an unbeliever. And by the way, I heard a message preached years ago, and I don't even remember the title of it, but it was something like 381. Every church is a 381 because it has the three, the Peter, James, and John. It has 8, which is the majority of the Christians, the 3 that are really close to the Lord, then the 8, the majority of Christians, and then it always has one unsaved person, or the few. And so every congregation is like the 3, 8, and the 1, and that's true. And or at least it's proven. Look at verse 19. And they began to be sorrowful, and to say unto him one by one, Is it I? Another said, Is it I? So they're baffled. And then let her see the betrayer. The betrayer. Verse 20. And he answered and said unto them, It is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goeth, as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Good were it for that man if he had never been born. He's referring to Judas Iscariot. And then number 3, the institution. The institution. Now, what else is not mentioned here between verses 21 and 22 is the fact that Judas at this time gets up and leaves the table. So when he's instituting the Lord's Supper, Judas is not around, which is not something that I would preach real hard on, but it is very interesting to me that only true believers were at the Lord's Supper, because Judas left. Because the Lord's Supper is for believers. So to me, I find that fascinating. But letter A, the supper. The supper. And some people call it the Eucharist. Eucharist just means to give thanks, really. But today we call this the Lord's Supper. Look at verse 22. And as they did eat, Jesus took bread and blessed and brake it and gave it to them and said, Take, eat, this is my body. He took the cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them. They all drank of it. He said unto them, This is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many. Verily I say unto you, I will drink no more of the fruit of the vine until that day that I drink it new in the kingdom of God. So he institutes the supper, and in no way was he saying, You are literally digesting as cannibals my flesh. Please eat my fingers and elbows and let me pour out my blood to you. He wasn't saying that. He wasn't saying in any way every time you partake of the communion, you're digesting Jesus, you get eternal life. He's not saying that whatsoever. It was symbolic of the bread and the wine of the body and the blood. Letter A, the supper. Then letter B, the song. The song. This Sunday, we will have not only 2 people get baptized, but one for sure, I think a second one as well. We'll also have the Lord's Supper. We'll also have testimonies from, I hope, several folks that had shared gifts this week and were just blessed by it. And so it'll be a very special day, Sunday. But typically, after we have communion, we'll sing one more song, and this is based on this right here. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. All right, so let's finish letter D for this evening, and we'll be done for tonight. By the way, the song that they sung is most likely Psalms 113 through 118. They're called the Hallel Psalms, or it's short for Hallelujah. Psalm 118 has a lot of famous verses in it. We turn there quickly. I would not win a sword drill right now. Chapter 118, it has, the Lord is on my side, I will not fear, what can man do it to me? It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. The voice of rejoicing and salvation is in the tabernacles of the righteous. This is the day that the Lord hath made, we will rejoice and be glad. It's got a lot of great verses there, but Psalm 113 through 118, mostly 115 through 118, but nevertheless, most believe it's the Hallel Psalms. All right, so letter D, the predictions. The predictions. Number one, he's going to be deserted by all. Deserted by all. Look at verse 27. Now remember, he just had this special time with them, breaking bread, not only commemorating their past victory, but also looking forward to future victory through his crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection. Verse 27, and Jesus said unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. But after that I am risen, I will go before you into Galilee. So he's already mentioned 2 or 3 times that he will be killed, buried, and he's going to rise again. And here he mentions it one more time. So not only he's going to be deserted by all, but he's going to be denied by one. He turns to Peter, or Peter and he have a discussion. Peter said to him, although all shall be offended, yet will not I. And Jesus said to him, verily I say unto thee that this day, even this night, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. But he spake the more vehemently, if I should die with thee, I will not deny thee in any wise. Likewise also said they all. Now, next week we'll finish this. I'll get you, as we get into the next couple of chapters, some charts and such, because Jesus is going to face 6 different trials, some against the religious crowds, some against the Romans, and I'll give you a time frame of what happened during that time of the day of the crucifixion and such. The Via Dolorosa, we'll go over that. There's a lot of things that's still facing ahead. Hopefully you don't miss a week. Brother, why don't you come up here real quick here. The missionary to Ireland. India. I'm looking right at you. I think it was the vest that threw me